Welcome to the Knockout Zone. Today I am focusing on the fighters that are heavy punchers in the ring. I'm talking about fighters that would knock you out with just one punch.
The Knockout Zone.
I want to focus on Eddie Shavers to begin with. Eddie Shavers didn't have the boxing skills of Muhammad Ali or Larry Holmes and fighters like those, but he carried a big punch, so he would knock you. And another thing about him is he didn't have the staying power. So whenever it came to the later rounds, he would tire up, but nonetheless, he was still dangerous because he would still knock you out regardless. I want you to see how Eddie Shavers, regardless of how tired he was in the later rounds fighting against Larry Holmes, whom he gave a difficult fight, but I want to see how whenever he was tired, he was still capable of knocking you out. Another boxer who, in my opinion, is heavy-handed is George Foreman. Big George carried a big punch. He could slightly move around the ring, though he was a bit slow, but he carried a big punch and he was fast in his hands as well. He could knock you out with just one punch, being such a big man. I want you to see how Big George knocked out Michael Moore in their heavyweight fight for the title. Another fighter who carries a big punch is Deontay Wilder. He depends primarily on his heavy right hand. When he throws that right hand and he catches you, you are gone. He didn't have the skills like other heavyweight, and he didn't even have a wonderful jab. The way he was jabbing, he would be like tapping you. But the minute you get used to that tapping and he unloads that right hand, then you are gone. I want you to watch how he knocks out King Kong Ortiz. Here is another interesting boxer who had a big punch. Former light heavyweight champion Bob Foster. Though he was orthodox and he had boxing skills, he had a very good jab. But the thing about him is, even though he was orthodox, jabbing you with his left hand, but he still carried a big left hook, which he would knock you out with. So I want you to see how Bob Foster uses his left hand as a jab as well as a knockout punch against Mike Quarry. Another fighter who, in my opinion, was also a big puncher is Mike Tyson. Iron Mike Tyson is a sensation. He threw his punches very fast, but he could knock you out with the left hook and the right hook. He still had that uppercut, which was so dangerous. He would knock you out with his punches, regardless of how big you are as a heavyweight, but his speed also contributed to the impact of his punches. David Tor is one of the heavy punches in the ring as well. He had a style almost similar to Mike Tyson. He was very fast and he could throw his punches very fast, such that you would never know which punch he would knock you down with. But David Tor is ever dangerous in the ring against his opponents. And he was a come forward fighter, not a very tall fighter, but he was able to use his height to his advantage, because he would bob and weave and come forward to you and throw those punches. He had tremendous speed, yet he carried a big punch as well. I want you to watch how he knocks out cold his opponent in the name of John Ruiz. One other heavy puncher in boxing is Tommy Morrison. Morrison was ever dangerous against his opponents because he carried that big punch. The only thing that Tommy Morrison was lacking was his chin. He had a soft chin. So if you could counterpunch him, you could knock him out right away. But nevertheless, Tommy Morrison is one of those heavy punchers that the boxing world has ever seen. I want you to watch how he knocks out Razor Ruddock with his left hook. Tommy Morrison is one of those punchers who had tremendous punch on both hands, but mainly his left hook was ever dangerous. Coming down to the junior middleweight division, Julian Jackson was all powerful. He had a marvelous punch. He could knock you out with just one punch and it's lights out. And to me, Julian Jackson is one of those fighters I believe it was ever dangerous to stand in front of, because he carried this amazing punching power and you didn't even know where it came from. Julian Jackson wasn't very fast in the ring, but nevertheless, if he caught you with the punch, and he also knew that he carried that heavy punch. So whenever he fought his opponents, he would always rely on his right hand. And he always knew that at the end of the day, he would knock you out. So in my opinion, Julian Jackson, if you were to fight against him, all you had to do was stick and move, just move around a lot and make sure he doesn't catch you, because the minute he catches you with just one punch, then you are gone. And I want you to watch how he knocked out cold his opponent in the name of Harold Graham. Another fighter today, in my opinion, who is a pound for pound fighter and he carries a big punch, is Gervonta Tank Davis. Tank Davis is amazing. He has this amazing power in his hand. He moves around and he likes to lure you into a trap where you would think you are winning the fight, you're catching him and he's just running around, and all of a sudden he comes with a big counter punch and he knocks you out. So Tank Davis, whenever you're fighting him in the ring, you should keep in mind that he is consistently being dangerous against you, because anytime he counters you, and he knows when to counter punch, and whenever he does, the boxer will find himself counting the stars. So I want you to see how Tank Davis does this by way of counter punching, using his heavy punching power against Romero. Here is another fighter who was a good fighter. He had all the boxing skills and yet he still carried a big punch. I'm talking here about Thomas the Hitman Hands. Thomas Hands had a big right hand which would knock you out anytime he catches you left. So Tommy Hands is one of those fighters I consider to be heavy punchers in the boxing ring. Even though he was so skilled in boxing, he would move around, he would jab, he carried a marvelous jab, but still he depended mostly on his right hand, which he would use to knock you out with. So Tommy Hands, in my opinion, can be considered one of those heavy punchers in the boxing ring. Another heavyweight fighter who, in my opinion, is a heavy puncher was Mike Weaver. Mike Weaver was a slow fighter, especially during the early rounds, but as the fight progressed, Mike Weaver had a lot of staying power as well. But the main thing about him is he carried a big punch and he knocked out most of his opponents because he was a heavy puncher. So the most important thing against fighting Mike Weaver was to make sure that you move around a lot, because at the end of the day, if ever he would catch you with a punch, then he would definitely knock you out. So I want you to see how Mike Weaver was able to knock out Big John Tate, who was the WBA heavyweight champion at the time, and reclaim the heavyweight championship. And I also want to remind you that this took place right at the end of the fight, because at that time championship fights went through 15 rounds. So it was on the 15th round that Mike Weaver was able to land that big punch that knocked out John Tate. Going back in time, we find the heavyweight champion Sonny Liston, who carried a big punch. We know that Sonny Liston was one of those feared boxers in the boxing ring, and most fighters wouldn't dare fight Sonny Liston because he could break your ribs with his punching power. And we know that he fought against Muhammad Ali, and Ali was able to move around and fight the right fight against Sonny Liston. But whenever he met a boxer who was stationary and who tried to stand toe to toe with him, Sonny Liston was ever dangerous. And I want you to see how he knocked out Floyd Patterson, who was also a very good heavyweight at the time, but Sonny Liston knocked him out. I don't know about you, you might have someone else that I've missed, but in my opinion, these are the heaviest punches that we've ever seen in the